So in this screencast, we're going to talk about attending behaviour, what it is, and how we actually go about doing it. So what we're thinking about here is culturally appropriate verbal and non-verbal behaviour. And that's very much relating to an individual. And the culturally appropriate point is really something you need to bear in mind. And you'll learn more about that as you go through your placements and through your practice. But it varies quite a lot. So, whether people shake hands, we don't tend to do that now, more for COVID than anything else. But for some people, shaking hands is completely inappropriate. There are different ways that people see our behaviour, our verbal and non-behaviour, and interpret it differently. So we've got to learn a little bit about that as we go along. So we're going to focus on our eye contact, vocal tone, and body language, which we know has a huge impact, more impact probably than the words that we say. And it has huge impact on what we are doing in our consultations. But the key for us is to make sure that the patient knows we're listening to them, because that encourages them to talk, and that's what we need them to do. So let's focus on eye contact first. So in most cases, you need to be looking at your patient or your service user in front of you. So look at them, but don't stare. We need to be able to give the breaks in the eye contact so that it feels comfortable for people. So just have a think for a moment. What gets in the way of good eye contact? In our clinical situations, that's often us looking at the computer, writing up notes. We might be scribbling on a notepad, or we might be, if we're an outpatient, we might be typing directly onto a computer, and we turn away from the patient and we stop giving them eye contact. So we need to be conscious of that, maybe asking permission to write notes, but making sure we keep looking back at the person so that they know we haven't forgotten that they are there. So we need to be mindful of that. Our body language says a lot about us. What's our posture saying? What we want to be doing is leaning slightly forward and looking relaxed in an easy, comfortable posture. We want our hands away from our face. We don't want our elbows on the table and leaning in that way. And, are there signs of tension with us or the patient? So we're not just talking about our own body language here. It's about observing and being attentive to the body language of our patient or service user. Are they smiling? Are they frowning? Are they thinking? You can sometimes tell that by looking at someone, can't you? Do they need a bit of time to process something? Are they appearing very tense? If they are, we need to do more to help them relax. But we need to be attentive. And one of the things that we'll learn in the workshops is a little bit more about how we actually look. And some of you will be quite uncomfortable about that. But actually, what it enables you to do is just to become that little bit more aware, so that when you get into your placements, your body language is going to be appropriate. And you do need to some extent to find your own style. Let's think a little bit about our vocal style. So this is about speed, volume, and tone. Quite often when you start learning skills and practicing in workshops, you tend to speak very fast. So often you'll find we're saying, just slow down a little bit. We need to just make it feel a little bit more relaxed. Some of you will have quite loud voices. Some of you will be quite quietly spoken. And we've got to get that balance. Your patient needs to be able to hear you. But we don't want everybody else on the ward to hear you as well. So we need to get that balance right. And tone, we can sound quite harsh with our tone, quite sharp, or we can sound quite gentle and welcoming. So thinking about your tone and becoming more aware of it will help you to develop a style that is going to be helpful to your patient. I think it's appropriate to expect that initially there's going to be hesitation, or you might be stammering a bit, because most of us will be quite anxious when we start doing this. because we're now thinking about it so much more. You're probably not anxious in most of your everyday conversations, but when you start thinking about a specific scenario with a patient in front of you, you can get quite anxious. So expect there will be a little bit of hesitation in places, and part of that will be, what do I say next? So expect that. It will get better with time. If you're anxious, if you're struggling on that day or having a bad day or you're emotional about something, that's going to show through in how you speak. But we also need to be looking for that in our patients. You know, are they expressing emotion? Not necessarily in words, but can you see that they're emotional about something? For yourself, you need to be thinking about, well, how do I respond if I'm under stress? Or if I'm under time pressure, am I going to start speaking a lot quicker so I can get this over and done with? Or are you worried? So just become more aware of your vocal style as we go through the sessions. So minimal encouragers, they might be called encourages, encouragements, doesn't really matter, it all means the same thing. What they do is indicate to the person you're talking to and listening to that you're with them, that you haven't zoned out completely. And it encourages them to keep talking. So the non-verbal minimal encouragers include the things we've just been talking about, like eye contact, but also include your posture. Are you looking as if you're attentive? Are you facing them? Are you looking relaxed, as if you're really in the room with them? Nodding can be appropriate, but we need to make sure we're not like the nodding dogs in the back of the car. So becoming more aware of how much we nod. Doing these videos, I'm aware how much I put my head on one side. It's something that we often do, and that can convey listening as well. But again, it needs to be not exaggerated. You know, smiling is a really positive thing, but if someone's just told you that their dog's died and they're really distressed about that, you don't want to be smiling and nodding. You need to be really conscious of conveying your concern about their distress. And sometimes we have a bit of silence, which is something that often people feel anxious about, but a few seconds to allow someone to think or to pull themselves together if they're emotional can be really, really helpful. So that's something that we have to learn and develop those understandings when that's appropriate and when we need to perhaps say something or perhaps ask another question. So there's the non-verbal things, and then there's the verbal responses that we have. And what we need to be aiming for is neutral words. Oh, so go on, tell me more. So you're just encouraging someone with those neutral words that are showing interest in them. And then we can use those things and type things that again show interest, that we're still there, we haven't gone away. But there are words that are unhelpful, and we need to be really mindful of these, and I can promise you I will point them out to you if you're doing them in the sessions. I don't know what your thoughts are about that. But the ones that I commonly hear, which I'm really encouraging you to avoid, are things that are not neutral words, but are part of our everyday conversations. So we might say, yeah, okay, right. But yeah, okay, and right are all suggesting agreement. And we tend to use them without thinking. But is it right to agree with everything that the patient says? I suggest it isn't. If they tell you something sad and you're in the habit of saying, okay, if they're telling you something they're distressed about and you're going, oh, right, yeah, it's really, really unhelpful because it's not okay. It's not all right. So we need to be careful and try and avoid those words, particularly if we're someone who uses them repetitively, which quite a few of us do. We can't do our jobs without asking questions. Questions are part of everyday life and they're really important. They help us to explore the situation, give us a bit more detail, and can help the clients to explore things and understand themselves better. And of course, they can convey that we're really interested. But what we need to be mindful of is how we word them and when we use what type of question. So we tend to have, why, what, how, where, when, could. Using the right question at the right time is a skill that we need to develop. If we don't ask questions well, they can make people feel uncomfortable. So if we start asking lots of questions before we've built some rapport with people, it can really get in the way because we haven't built up that trust relationship. People don't yet feel that comfortable talking to us. So we've got to spend our time getting to know the patient first. It can really damage our helping relationship. Even if we've already built a little bit of rapport, if we just go straight into questions, people can feel interrogated. They can feel uncomfortable, defensive, angry. And what we really need to think about is a lot of the things we're going to be asking about in our consultations are quite personal information. We're going to ask about their food intake, their physical activity, their smoking levels, their bowel habits, relationships, who they live with, what kind of facilities they've got at home. If someone's going to ask you all of those questions, you need to think, well, how would I feel? Do I really want to talk about all of those things with somebody I don't know very well? So we've really got to be careful that we don't make people feel as if they're being interrogated. And often what happens is we learn all about meeting and greeting people very well, and then we go on and ask them questions too soon and shut them down again, as if we've had a personality transplant. So we'll think a little bit about the closed questions. These are the ones that nearly always lead to a yes or no answer, and most often they're our agenda as a practitioner, not the patient's agenda. And there's all these different ways that you might ask questions. How long, how many sugars do you have in your tea? Lots of questions, particularly when we're asking about food, are closed questions. And there are good times to ask closed questions. If the patient's being vague, we need a bit of clarity. With some patients, it's going to be better. People with learning disabilities or people who perhaps have had a stroke and can't talk very easily, there are times when closed questions are going to be really important. And there are going to be times where we really need to know a specific detail. We really need to know how much of something somebody is having. But that's not perhaps as often as you might think. Our open questions are going to encourage us to get to know people a little bit better. Really important, particularly at the beginning of consultations. And we're encouraging them to give us a bit more detail. What was it that led up to you making this appointment? Give the patient more time to tell their story. So we're asking for explanations to gain a bit more understanding of them. When we're doing our assessments, you look at the model and process of dietetic practice, but where does food fit into your day? Gives us much more information. It might tell us about the social situation, who they live with, their work environment. We get a lot more than just asking, what do you have for breakfast? So our open questions are going to be a really important part of what we do. And the last thing I'm going to tell you about in this section is something called restatement, or it might be called verbal following. And this is where we're listening to the patient talking, but we respond to them and we show them that we are staying with their story. So it's selecting words, some key things that they've said, and repeating them back to them, but not loudly, quietly, just so that we're not really interrupting, but we are demonstrating that we're understanding and hearing. So it might be a single word, a few words, or it can be a sentence. So if someone's telling you, I'm really struggling with my appetite at the moment, I've got no appetite at all anymore, you might just pick up on the words, you're struggling, I've got no appetite. Those kinds of things. Or we can phrase it and say it in a tone that is questioning. You're struggling with nausea. So we're encouraging people to say, yeah, I really am. It's particularly bad in the mornings or whatever. So that we're encouraging them to say more. And that's the whole point of it. We're showing the patient we're with them, we haven't zoned out, we're still there, and